Before we start this story, let us know where you are watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day and enjoy the story, everyone. The afternoon that changed everything, the autumn. Sunlight poured through the tall windows of Cornerstone Cafe, creating golden patterns on the polished wooden floor. Natalie Brooks wiped down the marble counter for what felt like the 100th time that afternoon, her mind drifting to the art exhibition she had visited last weekend. At 23, she had learned to balance two worlds, the practical one, where she made lattes to pay rent, and the dreamy one, where she worked part-time at a small art gallery. Surrounded by beauty she could admire, but never afford. The cafe was quiet between the lunch rush and evening crowd. Only a handful of customers occupied the leather chairs scattered throughout the space. Most were absorbed in their laptops or phones, lost in their own private worlds. Natalie loved these peaceful moments when she could think without the constant hiss of the espresso machine drowning out her thoughts. The door chimed, and Ruby Chen burst in, her arms full of books from the independent bookstore she owned 2 blocks away. Ruby had been Natalie's closest friend since college, the kind of person who could make you laugh even on your worst days. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy bun, and her vintage dress swirled around her knees as she plopped into a chair near the counter. "Give me the strongest coffee you have," Ruby groaned dramatically. "I just spent an hour explaining to a customer that we cannot order a book that was never actually published. Some people think bookstores have magical powers." Natalie laughed, the sound bright and genuine. She loved these impromptu visits from Ruby. They made the long shifts bearable. She prepared an iced coffee with an extra shot, sliding it across the counter to her friend. "Rough day in the literary world," Natalie teased. "You have no idea." Ruby took a long sip, closing her eyes in appreciation. "How about you? Any exciting customer encounters?" Natalie shrugged, leaning against the counter. "Just the usual. Business people on their phones barely looking up when they order. Sometimes I wonder if they even taste the coffee or if it is just fuel to keep them running." Ruby's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Speaking of business people, did you see that guy who comes in every Tuesday? The one with the expensive suits and the phone permanently attached to his ear? The one who orders a black coffee and never says thank you?" Natalie rolled her eyes. "Perfect example of what I'm talking about." "What do you mean?" Natalie felt a surge of boldness, energized by the quiet afternoon in her friend's presence. "You know what I think? Rich men have no idea how to actually connect with people. They are so busy making money and closing deals that they forget how to be human. Romance, real romance, is completely foreign to them." Ruby laughed, nearly spilling her coffee. "That is quite a theory. You think money kills romance? I think it replaces it." Natalie warmed to her theme, her voice carrying through the quiet cafe. "They think expensive gifts and fancy restaurants are the same as genuine attention. They do not know how to listen, how to really see someone. Everything is a transaction. So you are saying no rich man has ever been romantic?" "I am saying most of them have forgotten how. They are too focused on their portfolios and profit margins to remember that people are not investments. Love is not something you can buy or optimize." The words hung in the air, bold and certain. Natalie felt pleased with her observation. It was something she had thought about often. Watching the parade of wealthy professionals who passed through the cafe each day, most of them absorbed in their own importance. That is when she noticed the movement in the far corner. Partially hidden by a large potted plant, a man stood up from his table. Natalie's breath caught. She had assumed that corner was empty. She always assumed it was empty during these quiet hours. He was tall, with dark hair that looked like he had run his fingers through it too many times. He wore charcoal gray pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that suggested he did more than sit behind a desk all day. But it was his face that stopped her thoughts completely. Strong features, yes, but there was something else, an intensity in his dark eyes that made her skin prickle with awareness. He walked toward the counter with measured steps, and Natalie felt every inch of distance closing between them. The cafe suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. Ruby had gone completely silent beside her, sensing something significant was happening. When he reached the counter, he did not speak immediately. Instead, he held Natalie's gaze, letting the silence stretch until it became almost unbearable. She could see the fine details now, the slight stubble along his jaw, the way his lips curved in something that was not quite a smile, the intelligence in those dark eyes. "Are you certain about that theory?" His voice was low and smooth, with an edge that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. Natalie's mouth went dry. Her confident words from moments ago seemed to evaporate. "I was just making conversation." "No," he said quietly, still holding her gaze. "You were making a judgment about people you do not know, about experiences you have not had." She felt heat rise in her cheeks. I did not realize anyone was listening. Clearly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a wallet, extracting several bills and placing them on the counter. His fingers were long, elegant, and when they briefly brushed hers as she reflexively reached out, the contact sent electricity through her entire body. The touch lasted only a second, but it felt much longer. "Keep the change," he said, his voice still carrying that undertone she could not name. Challenge, perhaps, or interest. Maybe both. Then he leaned in slightly, closing the space between them, until she could catch his scent, something clean and cedar-like with a hint of citrus. Her heart hammered against her ribs so loudly she was certain he could hear it. "I will be back tomorrow," he said, each word deliberate and measured, same time. "Perhaps then you can tell me to my face what you really think about men like me, assuming you have the courage." He pulled back, and the smile he gave her was slow and knowing. It was the smile of someone who had just issued a challenge and was confident about the outcome. Without another word, turned and walked toward the door. Natalie watched, transfixed, as he moved through the afternoon light. The bell chimed as he left, and only then did the spell break. Ruby grabbed her arm, eyes wide. Did that really just happen? Natalie looked at the money on the counter. $40 for a coffee that cost $4. But it was not the tip that made her hands shake as she placed it in the register. It was the way he had looked at her, as if he had seen past every wall she had ever built, straight through to something she was not sure she was ready to reveal. "Who was that?" Ruby whispered. "I have no idea." But even as she said it, Natalie knew something had shifted. In those few charged moments, something had changed inside her, something she could not undo, could not pretend had not happened. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 24 hours until he returned. 24 hours to prepare herself for whatever came next. The afternoon sunlight continued to stream through the windows, but somehow everything looked different now. The cafe felt smaller, the world felt bigger, and Natalie felt terribly, wonderfully awake. Natalie woke up before dawn, her heart already racing. She had barely slept, replaying every second of yesterday's encounter in her mind. The intensity in his eyes, the confidence in his voice, the way her entire body had responded to a simple touch. She told herself she was being ridiculous. He was just another wealthy businessman proving a point. He probably would not even show up. But as she showered and dressed, choosing her clothes with more care than usual, she knew she was lying to herself. The walk to Cornerstone Cafe felt longer than normal. Every step brought her closer to either confirmation or disappointment. When she arrived 30 minutes early, Ruby was already waiting outside with 2 cups of tea and a knowing smile. "Could not sleep either?" Ruby asked, handing her a cup. "Who said I could not sleep?" "Natalie, I've known you for 5 years. You are wearing your lucky earrings." Natalie touched the small silver hoops self-consciously. They were not lucky. They just happened to be her favorites. They sat on the bench outside the cafe, watching the city wake up around them. The morning air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and fresh bread from the bakery next door. Delivery trucks rumbled past, and early commuters hurried toward the subway station, clutching their coffee cups like lifelines. "What if he does not come?" Natalie asked quietly. "Then he is an idiot." Ruby squeezed her hand. "But something tells me he will." The arrival of the morning shift passed in a blur of cappuccinos and croissants. Natalie served customers on autopilot, her attention constantly drifting to the door. Each time the bell chimed, her heart jumped. But it was never him. By noon, she had convinced herself he was not coming. Of course he was not coming. Men like that did not come back to prove points to baristas. They moved on to the next thing, the next meeting, the next conquest. She was wiping down a table when the door opened at exactly 12:47, and there he was. He wore dark jeans and a simple navy sweater that made his eyes look even darker. His hair was slightly damp, as if he had just showered. When he saw her, he smiled, and it was different from yesterday. Less challenging, more genuine. Natalie straightened. Suddenly aware of the coffee stain on her apron and the strand of hair falling across her face, he walked straight to the counter. "Hello, Natalie," she blinked. "How do you know my name?" He gestured to her name tag, which she had completely forgotten she was wearing. His smile widened. "I am Julian." "Julian Hartfield. Natalie." She paused, then laughed at herself. "But you already knew that." "I did." He leaned against the counter, completely relaxed. "Are you still convinced I know nothing about romance?" She felt heat creep up her neck. "That was not exactly what I said. It was close enough." He glanced at his watch. "Your shift ends in 10 minutes, correct?" "How do you know that?" "I asked yesterday, after I left." He met her eyes steadily. "I wanted to know when I could take you somewhere without making you late for work." Natalie's heart stuttered. "Take me somewhere. If you are willing, no expensive restaurants, no fancy wine. Just something I think you might appreciate." His voice softened. "Something real." The community art centered 20 minutes later. Natalie found herself in Julian's car, driving away from the polished downtown area toward a neighborhood she rarely visited. The buildings here were older, paint peeling, windows covered with colorful murals. Children played on sidewalks while elderly people sat on stoops, watching the world go by. "Where are we going?" Natalie asked, curious but not afraid. Somehow, despite barely knowing him, she felt safe. "Somewhere important to me." Julian pulled into a parking spot in front of a renovated brick building. The sign above the door read, "Sunrise Community Arts Center" in bright, cheerful letters. Inside the building hummed with creative energy. The walls were covered with artwork, paintings, and drawings that showed real talent despite the young ages of their creators. The sound of laughter echoed from deeper within the building. Mixed with the chatter of excited voices, a woman in her 50s approached, her face lighting up when she saw Julian. "Julian, we were not expecting you today. I brought someone I wanted to show the place to." Julian gestured to Natalie. "This is Natalie. She is an artist herself." The woman smiled warmly. "Welcome, Natalie. I am Patricia, the director here. Would you like a tour?" They walked through rooms filled with easels and art supplies, past classrooms where teenagers worked on sculptures, toward a large open space where younger children sat in a circle. "Painting with fierce concentration, we serve kids from low-income families," Patricia explained. "Many of them have incredible talent but no resources at home to develop it. We provide materials, instruction, and a safe space to create." Natalie watched a little girl, no more than 8, carefully mixing colors on her palette. The concentration on her face was absolute, the kind of focus Natalie recognized in herself when she was lost in her own work. "How do you fund this?" Natalie asked. Patricia glanced at Julian, who shook his head slightly. "We have several donors who prefer to remain anonymous. Generous people who believe every child deserves a chance to discover their gifts," the truth revealed after the tour. Julian led Natalie to a small garden behind the building. Someone had painted a mural on the back wall, a stunning landscape full of hope and color. They sat on a wooden bench surrounded by potted plants and bird feeders. "You fund this place," Natalie said quietly. It was not a question. Julian was silent for a moment, looking at the mural. "My mother died when I was 9, cancer. My father threw himself into work afterward, building his company, making money. He thought providing financially was the same as being present. I grew up with everything money could buy and nothing I actually needed." He turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his eyes took her breath away. "I was angry for years. Angry at him, at the world, at the unfairness of it all. When I was 16, I started volunteering at a place like this. It saved me, gave me purpose beyond the family business. These kids, they remind me that life is not about what you have. It is about what you create, what you give, what you feel." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes. "Why did you bring me here?" Because you assumed you knew who I was based on my bank account? Julian reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. I wanted you to see that money does not define a person. What we choose to do with our resources, our time, our hearts, that defines us. She looked at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. I was wrong about you. You were wrong about what you thought I represented. His thumb traced circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. But your instinct was not completely off. There are plenty of wealthy people who lose touch with what matters. I have been one of them at times, getting lost in deals and profits, forgetting there is a world beyond boardrooms. What changed? You, he smiled, soft and genuine. Hearing you say those things in the cafe, it was like a wake-up call. I realized I had been sleepwalking through my life, going through motions, checking boxes, but not really living. Not really feeling the promise the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The children's voices had faded as the center closed for the evening. Julian and Natalie sat in the garden, hands still intertwined. Neither wanting to break the connection. I want to show you something, Julian said. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through photos, stopping on one of himself at maybe 18, standing in a room similar to the ones inside, surrounded by teenagers, all of them covered in paint and laughing. That was the first time I smiled after my mother died. Really smiled. Those kids taught me that joy does not come from having everything. It comes from being present, being real, being willing to get messy. Natalie studied the photo, seeing the younger version of the man beside her. Even then, there was something special in his eyes. A depth, a kindness that money had not created or destroyed. Thank you for bringing me here, she said softly. Thank you for giving me a reason to. Julian lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was old-fashioned, romantic in a way that had nothing to do with expense and everything to do with intention. As they drove back toward the city, Natalie felt something shift inside her chest. Her assumptions had crumbled, replaced by something far more complicated and infinitely more beautiful. Julian was not what she expected. He was better. He was real, and she was falling for him in a way that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. 3 weeks had passed since that afternoon at the community center. 3 weeks of coffee dates, long phone calls that stretched past midnight, and stolen moments between her shifts and his meetings. Natalie found herself living in two worlds that felt increasingly impossible to reconcile. In the mornings, she would wake up in her small studio apartment, surrounded by her paintings and secondhand furniture. She would make coffee in her chipped mug and take the bus to work. This was her real life, the one she had built with her own hands. But then Julian would text. And suddenly, she would find herself in spaces she had only seen in magazines. Not because he wanted to impress her, but because that was simply his world. Board meetings in glass towers. Charity galas, where her thrift store dress felt both out of place and perfectly sufficient, because Julian looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the room. Ruby noticed the change in her. Over tea one afternoon, she voiced what Natalie had been thinking but was afraid to say aloud. You are falling for him. Ruby's voice was gentle, not judgmental. Natalie stared into her cup. I am terrified. Of what? Of the difference between us? Of wanting something that feels too big to hold? Of losing myself in his world? Does he make you feel like you need to change? Natalie thought about it carefully. No, he loves that I paint. He asks about my art constantly. He came to the gallery last week and stood in front of my favorite piece for 20 minutes, just looking. He sees me. Then what is the real fear? That I am not enough, Natalie whispered. That eventually he will realize I do not fit into his life. The call came on a Thursday evening. Natalie was at home, working on a new painting when her phone buzzed. Julian's name flashed on the screen, but when she answered, his voice was different. Strained, exhausted. Can I come over? He asked. I need to see you, of course. Always. 20 minutes later, he stood at her door. His tie was loosened, his hair disheveled, and there were shadows under his eyes she had never seen before. Without a word, she pulled him inside and wrapped her arms around him. He held her like she was an anchor in a storm, his face buried in her hair, breathing deeply. "Tell me what happened," she said softly. They sat on her worn couch, and the story poured out. His company was facing a hostile takeover. A larger corporation wanted to absorb his business, and if they succeeded, hundreds of people would lose their jobs. The numbers made sense on paper. Selling would make Julian even wealthier than he already was, but it would destroy everything he had built. Every person he had promised to protect. "My board wants me to take the deal," Julian said, his voice rough. "They say it is smart business. That I would be foolish to turn down this kind of money. What do you want to do?" He looked at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her chest ache. "I want to fight. I want to find another way, even if it means risking everything I have. Those people, they are not just employees. They are families. Parents trying to provide for their children. Young professionals building their careers. I know their names, their stories, then fight," Natalie said simply. "I could lose everything." She took his face in her hands, making him look at her. "You will not lose everything. You will not lose what matters. Money comes and goes, Julian, but integrity, that stays. The person you are, that stays." Something in his expression shifted. "You really believe that?" "I know it." She pressed her forehead to his. "I have watched you with those kids at the center. I have seen how your assistant smiles when you ask about her daughter. I've heard the way you talk about your employees like they are people, not numbers. That is who you are. Not your bank account." The choice the next 2 weeks were brutal. Julian worked 18-hour days, taking meetings, crunching numbers, searching for alternatives. Natalie brought him food when he forgot to eat, sat with him in his office when he needed silent company, and listened when he needed to talk. She watched him exhaust every option. Reaching out to investors, restructuring debt, cutting his own salary to nothing. He fought with a determination that had nothing to do with pride, and everything to do with protecting the people who depended on him. One night, as they sat in his office long after everyone else had gone home, Julian turned to her with tired eyes. "I finally understand what my father never did," he said. "Success is not about how much you accumulate. It is about how many people you lift up with you. You learned that a long time ago," Natalie replied, brushing hair back from his forehead. "You just forgot for a while. Meeting you reminded me." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "You reminded me what matters." The resolution, the breakthrough, came from an unexpected place. One of Julian's early investors, a woman who had believed in him when he first started his company, offered a partnership instead of a buyout. It would not make Julian as rich as the hostile takeover would have, but it would save jobs and preserve the company's mission. When the deal closed, Julian's first call was to Natalie. She met him at the community center where he had asked her to come. When she arrived, he was in the main art room, surrounded by the children he mentored. Their faces were covered in paint, and Julian's expensive shirt had colorful handprints all over it. He looked happier than she had ever seen him. After the children left, they walked to their spot in the garden. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of jasmine from the plants around them. "I need to tell you something," Julian said, taking both her hands in his. "Before I met you, I was successful but empty. I had everything and nothing at the same time. I thought I understood what I was missing, but I did not. Not really." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "You changed everything. Not because you challenged my assumptions about myself, though you did, but because you showed me what real connection looks like, what genuine care feels like. You never wanted anything from me except honesty. You saw past the money, past the success, past all the walls I'd built. You saw me." Natalie felt tears gathering in her eyes. "I was wrong about wealthy men," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I thought money made people incapable of real feeling. But you proved that wrong every single day. Wealth did not make you who you are. Your choices did. Your heart did." "I love you," Julian said simply. "Not the version of me I thought I should be, but the version of me I become when I am with you. The real one. The messy one. the one who still has so much to learn. "I love you too," Natalie whispered. "I was afraid of falling for you because I thought we were too different. But we are not. Not where it counts. We both believe in creating something beautiful, in giving more than we take, in showing up for the people we care about." Julian pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her like he never wanted to let go. They stood there as the sun set, two people from different worlds who had found something more valuable than money or status, or any assumption about what love should look like. They had found the truth. That real romance has nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with choosing to see each other every single day, with showing up, being present, being real, in the garden where broken things were made beautiful again, where children learned that creativity mattered more than perfection. Julian and Natalie understood what they had been searching for all along. Love was not about grand gestures or expensive gifts. It was about standing beside someone during their worst moments, about believing in them when they forgot to believe in themselves, about creating something together that neither could create alone. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they made a promise without words, to keep choosing each other, to keep building a life where money was simply a tool to create good, not a measure of worth, to prove every day that the richest life is one filled not with possessions, but with purpose, passion, and the courage to love without limits. The end.